This episode of the Managing Madrid podcast is brought to you by patreon.com/Managing Madrid, where you'll find 2 bonus episodes per week at the very minimum, and sometimes more. But this week, on Thursday, the post-game show for the Villarreal game will be exclusively for patrons. And on Friday, our weekly world-famous Real Madrid mailbag is also over on patreon.com/Managing Madrid. Get in on that action and join an ever-growing family of Madridistas, a huge community. You're going to love it. Coming up today is a fun, big picture podcast, which will give you some optimism on Real Madrid's season and future, I hope. I think you're coming away feeling a little bit relieved. That is, of course, until tomorrow rolls around and something, hopefully not, but possibly something bad happens in that game. But until then, I think you'll find some solace in this podcast and you will enjoy it. So a lot of data, a lot of big picture discussion, and we're going to get right into it. Let's get started with the voices of Derek Ray and Ray Hudson. Let's go.
Nice article in the Managing Madrid blog. Wonderful lads that do a great job there. And worth reading about that man there. Karim Benzema needs to rest, and the numbers reveal why.
Times ended up almost looking like a 6-3-1. Some very good writing about that on the Managing Madrid website. First rate podcast as well. Of course, Fede Valerde was a huge part of the equation.
Hello and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Managing Madrid podcast. I'm your host, Kiyan Sobhani, and we're recording this a day before Real Madrid take the field on a pivotal Copa del Rey clash where people are losing their minds if Real Madrid don't lose and they continue this terrible string of form. We're going to bring that forward, though. We're not going to talk about Villarreal. We're not going to talk about that game. We're just going to talk about big picture stuff. As you know, this is Real Madrid crisis time. It is the 300 millionth crisis in Real Madrid's history, certainly since I've become a fan in 1998. This is just run-of-the-mill Real Madrid crisis. It happens like 8 times a year. So it's magnified now. We're going to talk big picture stuff. We have with us today, making his Managing Madrid podcast debut, Ali Elfakharany, head of data product at StatsBomb, our good friends over on StatsBomb who do amazing work. And of course, joining us, just rolling out of bed here, is Siddharth Ramsundar, also on the show. Gentlemen, welcome. Ali, congrats on your Managing Madrid podcast debut. Do you want to just fill us in on what you do at StatsBomb? Because head of data product goes over my head for sure, and you're doing way smarter stuff than I do. So can you just give us a little bit of an explanation of what you do over there?
First of all, thank you for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. So essentially, my work at StatsBomb is we kind of split our work into 2 sections, 2 product teams, really. One is data generation products, so it's creating the data from scratch that ends up, you guys end up seeing as visualizations or metrics or models on our social, and obviously our clients use in different forms and formats. And then we have the other side of that equation is taking that data, building models on top of it and tools and visualizations, etc. So I'm kind of in charge of the back end, if you will, kind of like the actual creation of these data products, data design, the tools around it, some technology and software tools around like computer vision and how we create data. That's kind of my official role, but really, like as with all growing companies, you put on different hats a lot of the time.
Got it. Okay, so I'm excited to dive into some of these stats that you've also unearthed for us, and we're going to do some share screening. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're in luck. Sid, haven't spoken to you in a long time, man. How are you feeling about everything that's happened at Real Madrid? I know you've been active on Twitter. Do you want to give us the elevator pitch on your thoughts on what's happening?
Yeah. I guess I'll get us started on some good conversation as far as I think I think it was before the Champions League final, or no, not. I think the second leg against City, when I asked if we lose, should Carlo be sacked? And the answer then was no. But I think with Carlo, the team has never played so well that you could excuse something like that happening. What we saw in the Clásico, it was there are some performances in as a coach at Real Madrid that you have that kind of tilt the perception and even the risk reward assessment on whether it's worth keeping you around, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think we had one of those moments in the Clásico where the elevator pitch I have is that the fullbacks are just not up to scratch. Carvajal was playing hurt, and you obviously have a lot of thoughts on that too about how they're not playing the youth teamers. But it really stood out to me how Ferland Mendy not overlapping pretty much destroyed 80% of the build-up sequences we had, as far as if he was an outlet, the through ball to him is easy, it's on. And the fact that the coach has allowed things to reach this stage, it doesn't really speak well on his behalf. And I think, I think we're going to see new fullbacks prioritized at Real Madrid. And I think this season is really, anything could happen, but it's not looking good right now, as we've discussed.
The funny thing about the Mendy point is that I think he made like one overlap, and it actually resulted in a great chance for Real Madrid in that game. It was the cross to Benzema, which I think was like the only shot, the meaningful chance we had in that first half. So the point I always make about Mendy is that he doesn't have to be Roberto Carlos or Marcelo in the final third. But if he can just even do some of those runs to drag away defenders and make some space and even put in the odd cross here and there, it actually would help tremendously. And you mentioned poor planning. In this case, you mentioned the coaches. Also, this goes back to the board and the decision not to bring in an option. Because if you look at, we have two wing backs who are pure wing backs. We have Carvajal and Mendy. We don't have any other pure wing backs. Everyone else who is a backup is a makeshift wing back. Nacho, Alaba, Lucas Vazquez, Alvaro Odriozola, I suppose, is the only pure one, but he is what he is. He's not going to be a game changer for you when he's not even healthy right now. And when he is, I don't really trust him defensively. And then you got some of the Castilla guys who everyone's calling out for. So we have a thin depth chart to begin with, and those that we have their own issues and injury issues. I will make this quick point about Mendy, and then I'll pass it along to Ali. But he at least I thought was good defensively in that Clásico. Now the bar is pretty low. I thought he did a decent job on Dembele in the first 25 minutes or so, and then kind of just tailored off, and the whole team went to shit. Ali, do you kind of share some of the similar concerns, the wing back thing? Do you want to take it somewhere else?
I thought the acquisition of Rudiger would allow Alaba to play a little more left back, to be honest. Like, I thought that would happen. I think Mendy is a great option. I wouldn't be calling for his head. I think he's obviously an elite defensive fullback, a little awkward with the ball, and obviously not the most attack minded. But Mendy is kind of almost a classic last 5 years of Real Madrid player, in the sense that he really profiles very well for these big knockout ties when you're going up against who was it last year? Phil Foden or Mo Salah, for sure.
Salah, Mahrez,
yeah, and obviously that left-footed right winger is probably the hardest profile to scout for. Something Madrid have lacked in the last 6-7 years since the Di Maria and Bale days. But when you have one of those elite players, a Saka, a Mahrez, a Salah, sometimes you need your fullback to be just a shutdown guy. We saw this in the Euro with Kyle Walker on Mbappe, that game plan, and it was somewhat effective. I know Mbappe kind of created the Tchouameni goal to a big degree, but it's always nice to have that in your back pocket, right? Like the versatility doesn't exist though. Where's the attacking option that kind of and off of Sid's tweets, I kind of dug a little around like the stats around Mendy and Vinny and that flank. And Vinny's kind of been having somewhat of an off year compared to his breakout last year. And I think a lot of it is tied to the situations he finds himself in. I think we have a new stat, which is ball receipts in space. So it's how many times are you alone when you're receiving the ball? We define as like 2 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters. And And you can see exactly how teams are game planning for Madrid now, where Vinny's ball receipts in space have gone way down, and Mendy leads the league in ball receipts and leads the team in ball receipts in space in the final third. Teams are just letting him have the ball in the final third, and just, hey, you break us down. And he's a capable passer. I don't think he's actually a bad passer, but like, he's not a dynamic offensive player for sure. And I've been surprised. I've been surprised because I thought the Rudiger signing would lead to a lot more Alaba at left back, a lot more maybe like Alaba at left back filling into midfield. A big tactical trend these days is like these fullbacks who masquerade as center backs or defensive mids, right? They're tucking in a lot more. If you open any Premier League game right now, whether it's it's Arsenal, it's City, it's Brighton or whatever, their fullbacks are kind of overloading the midfield zone as opposed to the wing zone. And I thought that's how it would play out a little bit. And I've been surprised that when Alaba has been used, it's been mostly in that left center back role, I believe.
He by all reports, he doesn't want to play left back. He wants to be a center back, which I don't necessarily blame him. I do think that's his best position, and even Alaba as a left back would probably be just a temporary solution. I mean, last year we saw a lot of Alaba left center back, Mendy left back, and they would be interchangeable. Alaba would go up the field, up the wing, and Mendy would stay back in kind of a left center back role. The ball receipt point is really interesting. I did not know about that, and the eye test tells us that Vinicius has less space to work with this year, and last year he didn't have that much space either. I want to ask you before we talk about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. I think he's averaging 2.5 less touches in the box. He's just getting the ball less in like dangerous space. When he actually does get the ball, I think his performance is the same or maybe even better. He's not getting the situational football, and some of that is Rodrigo and the team and the whole setup. But like, I do think at least part of it has to be that left back slot. To be fair to Madrid, here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is they have some fullbacks coming out from the Castilla that are highly rated. That has been an area where they've had good players come up multiple times. The bad news is it is a very hard position to recruit for left back. There aren't that many lefties in the world, and then there aren't that many that play left back at elite. Like that market is hard to scout for sure.
The good news is that there is wing backs in Castilla. You're right. The bad news is they're covered in dust, and Ancelotti has mummified them. He's not using them. Like you mentioned the Vinicius point too. I made this point in an article I wrote this morning that the math tells us that what happened last year was unsustainable. Vinicius and Benzema are both underperforming their XG this year. Now it's by a hair. It's not by much. But the difference is that last year they were not only overperforming them, they were dramatically overperforming them. Like they were really, really scoring goals that no one else in the world was scoring, basically. Like some of the chances they were converting were ridiculous. I do want to ask you this question though, before we dive in more into that. Rudiger, what are your thoughts on what's happening there? Because the eye test and the numbers told us that last year he was one of the best center backs in the world. What happened like against Barcelona and just overall his form? Is this just something we'll ride it out and he'll be awesome again? Is he just a victim of the context and the situation and the tactics? What's happening there?
Yeah, I think with center backs, it's always hard you have to watch them. It's hard to get a good feel for it. Like you can get stylistic stuff from stats, but you have to watch them. And I think my opinion and the rep on Rudiger has been he's been always great in like 3 center back systems, and less like all of his best seasons have come in that left center back marauding role. Roma had played that for a little bit when he had that breakout year, and then honestly, I've been surprised at Christensen's performance at Barcelona. But honestly, one of the things I would not count on is buying a center back from a Thomas Tuchel team that defended that well. It's like buying a center. It's like certain things. It's like going to buy a Simeone player, right? Like you couldn't tell from the fact that Chelsea didn't pay him what he asked for was kind of like an alarm bell to me that they think they could recreate that in other ways. Now, obviously, let's not go down the Chelsea rabbit hole, but I was a little skeptical. Obviously the price made sense, and the wages, and I think Madrid more saw it as a market opportunity, and kind of like some squad depth. Best case, he's a elite centre back. Worst case, he's a very, very serviceable second or third centre back, and he's fine, right? But you are seeing you do see like that dominant ball playing centre back that most big teams will look for. That's not him, right? Like he has positional issues, positional awareness issues every now and then. To his credit, he's a great squad player, right? He's played right centre back, he's played left. He's filled in at both fullback spots, I believe, in pinches. Yep. So I would always want the Rudiger on my team. Do you want him to be the first name on the team sheet? I'm unsure.
So that's where I have a few points to add there. Firstly, I think it's if Rudiger joined the Real Madrid team that hadn't won the Champions League, I think he is probably more of a starter. I think he's more embedded and performing better. I think a lot of it is that it's hard to break up Alaba Militao without a good reason to do so. And, honestly, going into that game, you could argue that it's hard to still go to Alaba and Militao and say in a big game, hey, you guys aren't starting together. Because still hasn't been any bad big game until that Clásico, which was terrible. And that's where Rudiger, what really stood out to me in the Clásico as far as the back line goes is that, yeah, Mendy's physical shape seemed good. Whereas Rudiger, he's a great ball player as far as, I know it was Tuchel's Chelsea, but the technique isn't the problem. He looked like, I saw a funny tweet saying it looked like he was pressing all the controls on the controller at the same time during the game. It's because, like, there was no direction on what he should do. And that's Alaba, having been at Bayern, he comes into Real first season. He says, I'm commanding the back line. He tells everyone where to stand. I feel Rudiger isn't in that position where he's being asked to command the back line. And, Alaba, I understand why he doesn't want to play fullback. He's just such an intelligent, cerebral player. But, yeah, that's where, the physical, I think as the physical condition improves and they test out different combinations, Rudiger is someone who, he doesn't lose his place in the team over a couple of years. He stays around. There might be, maybe we bring in Zidane and he's on his way to a Champions League final one day. Like, I'm not worried about him, but it sucks that he's not playing well now. But he's the kind of guy where I don't think he deteriorates because he didn't have a great first season. And one more thing I'd add is, physically, a lot of these guys, they looked off the pace, except Vinny, Rodrigo, and Benzema. In fact, those were the only guys who looked like they were anywhere near peak form physically, which is why I was so critical of the fullbacks as far as, our forwards aren't going to play any better. Maybe mid-season, the fullbacks reach peak form, but it's just not reliable. If you look like this in January, then it's just not a sustainable way for a club like this to go. That's just my opinion.
Taking a step back to Kiyan's earlier point, I do think people are overreacting, right? I think last year's team was extremely overrated. And I think a lot of that is because the level in La Liga was very bad, right? Like, I think that is not a classical 86-point team that wins the league title. Kiyan alluded to Benzema and Vinny finishing above their expected. I don't even think that's the problem. I would almost expect a Benzema at this stage of his career to do very well. And Vinny will be up and down. He'll have his variance. He'll grow into it. It was more on the defensive side where the overperformance was kind of crazy. How many times did we just eye test this? And I can back this up with some stats, but like, how many times was Courtois man of the match? Critical save, huge save. That's never a good sign. That's never ever. I don't want my keeper making any of those contributions. And despite we know less about keepers than we do know about strikers. Like, keepers get hot, keepers don't get hot. Like, goals saved above expected it takes a while to stabilize that stat. And this year, Courtois was bang average on that stat, and last year he was leading the league by 4. I think so. Back to very quickly to the Rudiger point, it does feel like he's stabilized the team. This team is a lot better than last year's team. We can get into like some specifics about the macro point, but I think people are. I'm not a Carlo fan by any stretch of the imagination. We were talking, me and Sid on Twitter about like, it's funny how La Liga has not had a really elite coach for a long time now. I think, obviously Xavi's up and coming. Zidane was kind of growing into the role, but when he started, he definitely wasn't that. And you see the Premier League teams with Pep and Klopp and Arteta and a lot of really, really good coaches. I think Carlo's a good coach. He's obviously very talented at what he does in terms of like man management and stuff like that. But I do think this team has improved a lot from last year. And I think people are missing sight of that because of this dip post the World Cup. And there were so many, I think two things have happened. One is Barcelona have gotten a lot better, and Barcelona have been bad for a long time now. Barcelona have been bad for 2.5 years, maybe. And so suddenly you're back to this normal 2-horse race, and you're not used to, I think, Kiyan, I saw one of your earlier podcasts saying this is a 90-point league. And so one draw and a loss looks bad in the context of a 90-point league. But overall, I would say Madrid have improved drastically.
Like,
yeah, also just
go ahead.
You can go ahead. I just want to say it's the added half or one extra player that moves away and gives the ball to Mendy compared to last year, because these are the European champions, because you saw them win. When you have a whole summer, every team just shifted their entire defense. That's enough to shift the expected goals and make Carlo's approach not good enough. That can change the whole risk-reward calculation. I think a lot of why Carlo's thing worked last year was because it was his first season in charge as coach, so nobody knew what to expect. But on to you, Kiyan.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all bring up such great points, and it's hard to know exactly where to start. But the thing is, you mentioned a lot of the points that are going against Real Madrid right now. It's, the numbers of Benzema, Vinicius, the Courtois stuff. Last season, he was, analytically speaking, by far the best goalkeeper in the continent. Like his Champions League numbers, the expected goals against, and the amount he was saving, leading the Champions League in saves. We talk about the defensive issues. Really, he transcended all of those issues. And even some of the stuff we got away with defensively, if you think back to flashbulb moments like, Ferland, Mendy, goal line clearance, that doesn't come on the back of incredible defensive structure. That comes down to individual heroics at the last second that saved us. And that's why, like, in some ways, and I will never take anything away from last year's Champions League run, because it gave me some of my best memories as a Real Madrid fan ever. But once you put down the champagne bottle and kind of zoom out, and it's hard not to do that because it's just such deliriousness and celebration, all that stuff. But once you zoom out and you look at everything, okay, was this sustainable? How can we retool this squad and make it better? And you guys said it's better. And I said kind of heading into this season, by default, it's better because you're taking a team that just won the double and adding Rudiger and Tchouameni to it. Now, after that, then Casemiro was sold and you lose a layer of paint there. I'd argue long-term, it might be better for the team to start throwing Tchouameni into the fire and getting playing time now, get those reps in now, so that, because a lot of people were saying, well, when we sign Tchouameni, what's the point? Because we already have Casemiro. This guy's never going to play. Now it turns out that, it made sense from a transition standpoint. But
in my opinion, that's also the main reason, just really key there. It's the main reason the offense hadn't dropped off till now without Benzema is because of Tchouameni's added press resistance. I also believe. I think it's I think if you run back Casemiro, I think the offense tanks even faster. Honestly, as great as Casemiro has been at.
I agree a lot. As a Barcelona fan, actually, I could not get. I was so pissed that you guys got Tchouameni basically for free with the Casemiro money. I'm like, oh my god, how do they keep getting away with the best ball playing six maybe in the world? And you can see that. I think he's second on the team in line breaking passes. He's fit in. I see some criticism of him on tactics Twitter sometimes, and he's young, man, and he's fucking good. He's better than. I mean, he's insane.
Yeah, just to expand on that too. I'm in the same boat as you are, but in a lot of ways, I'm not really worried about a lot of these players who are out of form. Obviously, Tchouameni's injured right now; he's not even playing, and you could have used him against Barca. There's no question, and all these other games. But I'm not too worried about the form of Vinicius. I'm not too worried about the form of Rudiger. Even all these are really, really good players who will be fine, and you kind of ride the wave. This is also, this is statistically speaking, this is the part of your Real Madrid always dip. I'm not going to use that as an excuse, but a lot of these players will bounce back in the springtime, you hope and you assume. But one of that, I guess, part of the argument I would say is that could you argue Real Madrid are worse? And I'm excited to dive into the numbers that you have, Ali, that would prove otherwise and stuff. But I guess I'm speaking about more of like an overall holistic perspective. Carvajal, I don't think is getting better every year, and he's your starting right back. That's a huge point of concern to me. There were so many problems against Barcelona. That's the one I led with in the post-game podcast, was that Carvajal is basically a corpse right now. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to him. One of the best right backs we've ever had. Was as recent as a few months ago, he put in an amazing performance against Luis Diaz in the Champions League final. But my argument has always been that, like, if you want that version of Carvajal, or even like Mendy in these big games, if these are your big game wingbacks, you need someone to give them proper rest in between. Carvajal was not 100% in either of those Super Cup games, and that kind of goes to show you how much trust Ancelotti has in the younger fullbacks, where, let's be quite honest, this sounds like a Real Madrid fan not like discounting the Super Cup just because we didn't win it, but I would much rather go down fighting in a Super Cup semi-final and final with Vinicius Tobias than seeing my starting right back get absolutely dragged on the field physically when he's not even 100%. Lose that way, you know? So those are just kind of little things that, and you spoke about that the team has more defensive issues than offensive issues. Well, I think that's true. The fact that it's a very predictable offense right now with getting the ball to Vinicius in transition, all these opponents right now know that's happening. Like, you press this team high because we haven't been press resistant, and then you just focus on making sure Vinicius has as little space as possible, and that's the blueprint. And eventually you're going to come up against these teams who also have stars like you do, maybe even better players, and if the margin will come down to tactical differences, you know, and that's what's kind of concerning to me. So I think it's a lot on Ancelotti to kind of retool some of the tactical ideas, because the scouting report is out. What do you think about that aspect of it?
I also think, I agree. Look, I don't think Carlos just, we were talking about, like, he's not the kind of coach that comes in and puts in this like next cutting edge game model that's gonna be, robotic and automated and will carry you through your lulls, right? Like these are the kind of that kind of approach is the approach that makes you have like a very high floor, right? Where you know what you're doing week in, week out. The team kind of knows where to go, what to do. And that kind of stuff typically, like, maybe sometimes lowers your ceiling a little, right? We've seen Real Madrid on a good day, if things are going well, that team is unbeatable with the combination of talent and physicality and press resistance they have when Modric and Kroos are on it and stuff. About the like, I think this is a very normal curve for like the Vinny as a superstar, right? Like, you break out. At first, you're this young guy who's like just going past people for fun, but you can't finish. And then you break out. You have that breakout year, the year you need. And then suddenly it's a different game when the scouting report is half of it is about how to stop Vinicius, right? And I think I'm very positive about the talent level Real has, and I think I'm very positive about this year. I think they're basically as good as Barcelona. I think they're a little more anti-fragile, actually. I do think that Barca team may be a little more hungry for the league title and a little more bought in, and maybe a little deeper in key areas. But I do think part of the problem of the attack is Fede. Like, I don't think that version of kind of a right winger, Valverde, really lends itself to like good attacking angles. And I know he's been playing out of his mind, scoring everything he touches, but I don't think he's a like a box to box midfielder, and you need an attacker out there. And that is the hardest role for everyone to fill right now. Like, if Bukayo Saka were to fall off Arsenal would be in deep trouble. If only Barcelona have a backup right wing, really, and that's Rafinha. But like, if you look at the top teams in the world, that right wing spot is a problem everywhere. If Mo Salah were to drop off, who's the backup there? No one. Everyone else has a backup, like Darwin, Jota, Diaz, etc. And so that has typically been a very hard role to fill. And Real, and look, you had a logjam in midfield with Kama, Vinga, and everyone wants minutes, right? Like Modric isn't falling off, everyone wants minutes. And so this right wing spot has saved the argument for next year, where Valverde, someone's going to be the odd man out, right? And so that's the good news from that. But it definitely hasn't. I know Fede is like a fan favorite. He's scoring screamers. It's fun to watch. But he's not really a front three of like a elite attacking team in any way, shape, or form. In terms of like, you can't really, he can't, do it week in, week out, kind of break down a team. And so I guess those are my thoughts. Zooming out, man, this team is better. I think people are a little unhappy because it's very hard to like win a double, but get better process and worse results and be happy, because you feel like last year was like the kicking, the starting point for something great, and this team is young and they're doing well in the transfer market, and the World Cup kind of broke nicely, where Kroos and Benzema 0 minutes at the World Cup, so you think you're coming back strong and ready. But this team is better. It's not their fault Barcelona are back, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars getting back to where they need, and they have a young, hungry coach.
Well, I do think it changes the expectations. That's all. It's okay to not press and like barely, win the Champions League and get 86 points, because the next best team in Spain is 15, 20 points behind or whatever. But I do think it changes the standard. I think Carlo was okay for that transition year in a weak league. Everything's relative, and that's where I actually expect this team to look really good at some point, and it wouldn't change that Carlo needs to go out if they want to maximize their talent, because Pintus's periodization, the way it works, this is the worst they're going to look. January 3rd is when, even if you go back to Carlo's previous spells, they didn't look too great in January. Zidane, if you go back, they're rotating in January. January is not an easy month in Spain, and I wouldn't be shocked if Carvajal can go and lock up someone. Like, they might win El Clasico. The next El Clasico, they might just win it, honestly, with Tchouameni. I agree that one thing that's changed is that, and maybe you want to get into this, but this might be the first year that the team isn't the best with Kroos, Modric, Tchouameni, and Valverde as much as it might be best with Tchouameni, Rodrigo, and one of Kroos or Modric with Valverde. I think that has changed. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true, because specifically Valverde has reached a level of physical ability where his burst past people in midfield is, I think, giving him more value added than Kroos and Modric. And that's why I don't think the Kroos retirement rumors are done. I think that's why they subsist. I think Kroos himself knows, like, I don't want to stay around and start on a team that has a lower ceiling than if I step aside.
I wouldn't put it past this team. Like, I'm looking at that Liverpool game at Anfield. That's the next big European test. Despite all the struggles, I would not be surprised if they win that game and then advance to the next round and play a contrast to what they're doing now. And Liverpool might be a good wounded animal, or maybe not. Maybe that makes them dangerous. But this has always been a team that needs to buy time. Like, if this time of year they usually dip, and sometimes I don't really care what it looks like. If they can progress, it buys them time to figure things out. That's basically what happened last year. That first game against PSG, you would never think in that moment, when Messi's stepping up to take a penalty against Courtois after dominating Real Madrid, that Real Madrid were going to win the Champions League. No way. I mean, even at the halftime of that PSG game, that team was, I wouldn't even put a penny on if someone had a gun to my head. But they did it. There's contrast to the performance.
Even at halftime of Chelsea, I think by the City game, you could tell they were competing and they were in it. But even at halftime of the first leg at Chelsea, they were up 2-1, I believe, at halftime. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know if they have this. Yeah, look, I think Sid's point about relative expectation is the big one, right? Like, we're back to an era for the next 2-3 years where, you know, a week 85 probably doesn't get you a title. To be clear, I think Real Madrid are easily in the top 3 favorites to win the Champions League. I think they've gotten a great draw. I'm not a believer in this iteration of Liverpool. They don't, you know, they haven't looked. Obviously, they're very talented, elite coach, elite players, and so 2 legs, anything can happen. But I don't think at all. I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting is, I think by the quarterfinals of the Champions League, I think 3 of the best 6 teams in Europe will be out, because I think Barcelona are a top 6-7 team in Europe, and they're not going to be there. The loser of PSG Bayern is a top 6 team in Europe, and they won't be there. The loser of Madrid Liverpool are probably a top 6 team in Europe, and they're not there. And I think easily, like next year, it gets harder, because I think that Arsenal team is coming for people. Like, that Arsenal team is easily a top 6-7 team in Europe right now, and they're young and they have money to spend. And so I do think there's a gap here. There's an opportunity here if the draw opens up and they get, you know, some luck at Anfield or a good performance. But I would have them favored against that Liverpool, I think.
You're giving Real all the Real Madrid fans listening to this podcast driving are about to crash because they're so happy. They're like, oh, we might win the Champions League, and all these points are valid. According to 538 and according to everyone in England, Real Madrid has no chance to win the Champions League. Those of us who have watched this team know that even if we're like the last place team in the 5th division, we have a chance somehow to win this competition. That's just how the way it bounces with this team.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the paradox of Real Madrid right now is that they need to change coach, but they may win the Champions League. In my opinion, I think that's the paradox, because there's many outcomes. Yeah, like he said, Arsenal. I think Liverpool are a joke for what it's worth. Like I think if there's a team that's legitimately like the type of reaction we got after a Clasico defeat, like they play like that every week. They play like, and they don't even win. Like their tactics are completely mismatched with their personnel right now.
I think they would admit that very quickly. Like, I think they know they're in transition. They might. You never know with these huge games. They might be smart and rational and play it. You can't put it past Klopp, right?
No, but you can. In some ways, they're like Real Madrid, you know.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I agree with that statement. Like, they're just they know how to win, man. I know they're beat up too physically. Like, I think the combination of the Premier League's brutality with the World Cup is tough on those players. I think Van Dijk is missing those legs.
He's missing the first one, I believe. So Luis Diaz is going to miss the first leg. Yeah. It's looking tough.
They're beat up. Yeah, they're beat up for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, the reason I'm confident is more the intersection of how Klopp sets these team up and the injuries. It's you know, I've never seen him solve the problem that he'd have to solve over these 2 legs with this sort of personnel. But I agree that in a big game, there's always a chance with the other team. However, I think that's the interesting contradiction, because in fact, I know for a fact they're going to be one of the best big game teams in Europe when it comes around, because Antonio Pintus, if you just go look at his career in the last half decade, this guy is just so impressive for the way he had Inter, but also Real in 16-17 and last year. The way these guys looked in May, that level, it justifies them looking this poor now. Like, that's why the reports came out immediately after the Clasico from the hierarchy saying, hey, we're not worried it was because of the physical condition. I agree. But however, I would replace coach is really my last point. No matter how well they do,
let me ask you a question. It seems like the consensus right now is Carlo out. I'm not saying I disagree or agree. Who do you guys want? Who do you guys think is a good coach?
Yeah.
That's available.
That's exactly what I was. I'll just put a few guys on the table. That's exactly what I was about to say. Zidane is the obvious one, and I think that's a really obvious one, because he organizes the block in the first and second phase. He organizes his progression in the first and second phase. Final third, it's a little inconsistent depending on the team, but all things considered, he likes ensuring the team is compact defensively, is what I noticed the second time around. If not him, I will rule out Thomas Tuchel, because as everyone in Europe talks about, he's just he's not a good enough communicator. He's a bit like Antonio Conte with a more progressive style of tactics, but not necessarily better communicating to players of Real Madrid caliber. But if it's not Zidane, I will say De Zerbi and Nagelsmann are the two that I think Real Madrid can pick up. If it's not Zidane or Raul, because he's inside.
I think one of the interesting trends over the last 5 years is objectively, like, the biggest club in the world who are successful don't really hire like these tactical coaches, and it's one of the more interesting things in world football, right? Like they hire guys they know, they hire guys with big man management because they know they're going to get the talent. And I'd love to, like, who is the last coach you would say is like a progressive tactics coach? Even Mourinho was maybe like near the prime end of the, like, kind of end of his prime. Pellegrini, maybe a good shout, who's like kind of like loved by tactics Twitter and like has some innovation in him. But it's been interesting, like at least the Barca guys, they try the young guys that like play their style or whatever, but at least those guys are kind of like, they look a lot more like modern football, right? Like they're pressing hard and stuff like that. Whereas the Madrid guys have traditionally not been that, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that question is possibly never, and I'm not exaggerating. You asked him what the last time was. Like, there's Mourinho, before that Capello maybe, but even these guys, like Capello was quote unquote tactician in the sense that he played defensive structured football, counterattacking, but not in the sense of like the new age up and
for
coming.
Sure, he was not new age by 06.
Yeah. And so the Real Madrid's model has generally been, there isn't really a pure sporting vision that makes sense, where this is the style, this puzzle piece fits here, this puzzle piece fits here. It's here, like, let's just get as many good players as possible and get a coach who commands the respect and can literally walk in the locker room, swing his dick around and be like, hey, I'm Zinedine Zidane. Hey, I'm Carlo Ancelotti. But that's like when Sid mentions De Zerbi, like, I'm like, I don't know, Sid, that guy's not going to walk in and tell these guys what to do. Maybe he can, but it's an unknown at least. And that's why even the difference between Tuchel and Raul, Tuchel is the better, more established, proven coach. But I do wonder between him and Raul who would command the more respect. And my calculated guess is that Raul would win that battle easily in terms of that debate, you know?
I mean, the big name always thrown around. I haven't watched enough of them. I saw his debut, Xabi with playing with Leverkusen now. Xabi Alonso.
Great shout, Xabi Alonso. Yeah, I thought you said Xabi for a sec. I was like, Sid, I know you're a Barca fan.
Xabi Alonso. Xabi Alonso. Obviously, he seems like he wants to take the steps up, and he's gone to like a upper end team in Germany. But his Sociedad B teams seems quite good, profiled quite well, and so that's a guy who's been taught by everyone too, like from Benitez days through Pep, and Mourinho, and he's seen it all, and he definitely commands some respect in the locker room, as well as maybe have some tactics. I'm obviously like a giddy Arsenal fan right now, but the best of Real Madrid, like the best case scenario for Real Madrid is to have one of these ex-players go be an apprentice with a Pep, with a Klopp, like if Modric today were to retire and go be Klopp's assistant for a couple of years and then come back and coach the team. That's kind of like that's how you end up with an Arteta, who is an ex-player, has the kind of like ex-player respect, but also has the kind of tactical background because the thing is, I think it's a model that's worked, but you cannot deny that it's a model that will underperform in the league, because game models win you leagues. Game models win the consistency of here's our style and we're going to dominate using it. It helps you in the league a little more than it does in knockout competition. And I don't think it's a coincidence that if you look at the last 15 years where Real Madrid have been a top 2 team in talent every single year except bar 3 maybe, they came up against Pepsi Barca and stuff like that, but like they underperform in the league a little. I think that's that's safe to call a trend by this point. And I wonder if they ever pivot from that. I don't think they do. I agree with you, Kiyan.
I have a few ideas on why it's at least from what I'm gleaning now, there's essentially two types of people who go into management. There is the person who's really passionate about how to develop players, how to win games, about developing the week-to-week strategy. And then there's someone who is passionate about winning. And a lot of the geniuses we refer to are the former, where they're passionate about winning, but more so they're passionate about the process itself, about developing players, about creating that strategy. But most of those guys who are that passionate are not the type of people who would get respect from Real Madrid's dressing room because they're weirdos or they don't know how to speak to people or whatever, like Rafa Benitez. And I think that's where my suggestions were somewhat keeping that in mind. I like Xabi. I guess like the conventional ones, Zidane, in my opinion, his strength is that he rotates every week, or he prefers rotating, but he also, especially his second spell, he started talking about how, hey, you're only the best if you win the league. We need to defend every week. Like he started sounding a bit like Xavi does at Barcelona about the league. And I think a coach who knows to rotate, but also have that consistency is there a guy. Now, he won't press. I will say, though, pretty much if you can do 95% of things right for the job, like it's hard to find a better club and coach fit than that in general. So in my opinion, Real will be fine because when Zidane is coach at various points in this coming decade, they will probably perform pretty close to your ceiling in the league. Even I know Barcelona dipped when Zidane was around, so which is why we won 2 league titles with him. But between his improvements, if he had this version of Vinny, I think they're a 90-point team under Zidane the second time around. And that's where Xabi Alonso, I think you're right, he went under a lot of coaches. De Zerbi I only recommended because watching his teams, I feel like De Zerbi and Nagelsmann are maybe not Nagelsmann as much, but they're a little more sociable in the way they coach is the best way to describe it. Like the way they coach is it's almost collaborative. The way Brighton play, they're passing until the opposition play. Until the opposition come and press them. That's a bit Real Madrid for me. The way Modric and Cruz, it's a bit practical, hands-on, think on your feet on the floor. And the other one who, Nagelsmann, I know the first season at Munich, the criticism was he was talking to Muller, Kimmich, and the leaders too much. But this season, I'm liking what I see as far as it's a hybrid of I have good ideas, but also I want you guys to be in the best positions to succeed on the pitch. I want you guys to go. And, Nagelsmann might be the first coach since Mourinho who convinces Perez that he can, essentially create a super team that's based on all these tactical principles, but also has the Real Madrid stars buy-in.
There's another element to this, and that's kind of the patience that a club like Real Madrid has. And some of the more progressive tactical ideas or adjustments that some of these really promising coaches make, and like people like Arteta, those require patience. The way that Real Madrid works is that if we had Arteta as a coach, for example, he would have been fired long ago because we wouldn't have the long-term vision. Like, hey, if you stick with this for like 2 years, I think you might actually have something. But the growing pains and the losses that come with that process is not tolerated at Real Madrid, for good or bad. I'm not saying it should be, but like,
well, so the issue, what ends up happening here, I agree with you completely. That's a fantastic point. What ends up happening here is what happens if Jack Grealish scores that chance, and like one 5-year stretch, Real Madrid will not win the Champions League just out of luck, even if they're the best team, right?
Yeah,
like
such is the margin.
If you game this out, and we can prove this statistically, I think if you look at like our tier 1 teams, they win the Champions League. Maybe that's changed over the last 10 years, but on average, they should have about a 25% chance to win the Champions League. So basically, we're saying the best team in the world has a 25% chance of winning the Champions League. A lot has to go right. Even if you're doing everything, you're gaming it out, very meta strategy and all of that. And every single one of those Real Madrid runs, I would say, of the 4 Champions Leagues Real Madrid have won, only one didn't feel in
5.
doubt. Oh, 5, I apologize. Only one didn't feel in doubt, which was I believe the Juve year.
Juve,
that
yeah. They were amazing that year, yeah.
Exactly. That didn't feel in doubt. That felt like we're the best team and we're about to show you. Everything else felt like chaos, right? And I'm not saying they're gonna come the right side of that coin flip more often than not because they have the elite players, but sometimes you're gonna hit the post and you're gonna cry, and it's and so the issue with that lack of patience is if you define your success with this knockout competition, you're gonna have these years where you're a little too impatient and you're gonna get rid of good coaches. And the biggest example is I didn't that Mourinho at Real Madrid, like, he deserved the Champions League. Forget that he should have left by the end of it. But like those 4 years in the semis, you win some, you lose some, man. Like Ramos skies a penalty. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest what if in possibly Real Madrid history is what if Ramos doesn't score the header in the final against Atletico? Like Ancelotti's gone because of that fine margin. And that's why I always say, like, and that changes the next 5 years, and that's why I always say and that's why I said today, like, in the deliriousness of winning the Champions League last year, I think someone needed to put down the champagne glass and just look at those fine details of, okay, so what does happen if Grealish scores that chance, or if Messi scores that penalty, or if I don't know, whatever else.
Luka Modric doesn't have a ridiculous outside of the foot pass to bring you back against Chelsea. I was telling Sid, I thought that was the game you should have lost the most, actually. That Chelsea. The
Chelsea one was the one I felt the most uncomfortable in. Yeah, I agree with that. That was the hardest one. So, but like, look, to be fair, like, that's football. Every champion has that, there is, but that's why I said you have to look at the process, not just the results, to see what is sustainable and what is not, so you know exactly how to plan for the following season and whatnot. Said, I know you want to make a point, then we gotta move on to some other things quickly.
Yeah, just it ties into the Chelsea game and the paradox Real Madrid find themselves in. It's Carlo's contract still one more year after this summer, or how's it?
I have to look at it.
Well, either way, I think it just gets harder and harder when, at least right now, we can only talk about now. You won the Champions League. What if you win it again and don't win the league? What do you do with Carlo? Because last year, it was partly Modric's outside of the boot pass. The other thing was that N'Golo Kante could no longer run after Chelsea went up 3-0. Like, those guys stopped running. And when you get to the City second leg, Real Madrid got better, but also they had a couple months to get better because La Liga was weak. City and Liverpool got progressively more tired as the season went on. And I think this season we're going to see the Premier League has reached the stage where the coaches are better, but the league is so strong that their own teams might not reach the end of Europe at 100% level that Real Madrid can. And the way Real Madrid approach things, I just think it'll be interesting to see that, mainly what goes down with Carlo in the process, because there's a world where they win it back to back. What do you do with the coach?
Also a great point, by the way, because I believe that Juve year is the only year they were top as well, right, of the league, of those 5.
Yeah.
Until last year, of those 5, of the 4 before them, they were kind of, you'd be watching. I believe one year they were like 3rd, and you'd be watching like the week before a big Bayern tie, and like, or a big Chelsea tie or whatever, and everyone's playing, and Real Madrid are all less resting, and they know that their season comes down to these 5 games in March, April, May. And
I mean they
it's
were
a weird
5th.
Spot to be in.
They were 5th when they won it in 2000. They had to win that just to qualify for next year's Champions League.
I believe the stat is, it's so funny because compare that to Barcelona. I believe how many Champions Leagues are they now? 14, 13?
Real Madrid?
14. Yeah, 14.
I believe 2 of them have been won as like doubles, whereas Barca's 6 have all been won when they were league champions. Yeah, it's just it's
funny,
either
all or nothing for Barca. All or nothing.
Yeah, which is such a different way to approach the game and the sport.
Seriously, it's a way of like operating your club, your organization. Yeah.
This is unrelated to what we're talking about in some ways, but you mentioned Arsenal a while back in the podcast and how they're a top 6-7 team that's just, and in the next couple of years are going to be a problem. I agree with that. There's also another team here, Manchester United, who I think are obviously improving. And these guys are, I guess I'm just interested in how that Manchester United-Barcelona game goes. I'm really fascinated by that because in a lot of ways, and I told Diego this, my co-host on Chudos y Tácticas, who obviously works for Barca TV, lifelong Barca fan, I was like, you guys, just to give you a warning and look, it might sound like a salty Real Madrid fan saying this because we just got our asses whooped by you guys, but you guys often look at these classical wins thinking like, oh, you guys are turning the corner and you're back in all this. And obviously the 4-0 last season, PK, the famous tweet, we're back. Then you get knocked out in the Europa League. Just to let you know what you did against Real Madrid, a team from like 100th division in Spain called Casareño literally did this to us. Like everyone's doing this to us. Everyone beats Real Madrid or like does a moral victory and they think they're back, not realizing we just kind of like are putting these brutal performances against everyone. Just give you a warning, Diego. Once Manchester United rolls around the corner, you guys got to, at some point, you have to stop measuring these classical wins as your trophies. You got to actually start beating these other teams, not named Real Madrid. I'm just really fascinated by that, how that goes. I don't know, Ali, because you're a Barca fan. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think Manchester United are improving and they're very good. I think it's honestly like almost miraculous what that coach has done.
Yeah.
And we talk about like tactician, right? But he's obviously had to make some very tough management decisions.
Yeah.
Like the clash with Ronaldo. He's come in and set the tone and like talking about the salary structure. And I believe Sancho, I don't know if it's for mental health problems or not, but Sancho isn't playing now. And that team is wildly improving. Obviously Barcelona are still favorites just because they're missing quality, right? Like they're missing quality in some key spots. And it's year one of that rebuild, if you will.
Yeah.
But that is a tough team, man. And I think, look, I'm a La Liga lover. I watch about more La Liga than the Prem. And I really enjoy when La Liga beat Premier League teams, so I can text my friends and let them know what's up. But man, you watch the Prem these days, the coaching is just like the competitive level and coaching is just like I'm watching Newcastle last week and the level of pressing and dedication and coaching and like that is La Liga's had a tough 2-3 years here. I think with like some of the second tier clubs not nearly as ferocious anymore. Obviously Ishbili are in the relegation zone. Atleti look like a shell of themselves most nights. And it's been like I'd love for some of the better coaches, like even when Emery, who now like the fact that Emery would leave Villarreal, who are easily like in a Champions League race, like in a top 4 race, right? To go to a mid-table Premier League team, that kind of shows you the pull right now of the money and the talent, the player talent level, and it's fascinating watching it. It's fascinating watching it play out. I was telling Sid the other day, one of the problems the market is having in general is like these City type, City, Chelsea, etc. They can't sell players anymore because the wages are so high. Like these players who are stuck on the bench, they're starting to have to sell to themselves. Like City gave Arsenal Zinchenko and Jesus because there's no other place to offload players with that kind of wages. Ziyech is sitting on the Chelsea bench. I'm sure there are a lot of teams that would love to.
Why isn't anyone from England taking Hazard from us then? So
well,
surely someone is stupid enough. So surely there's one rich stupid person out there that can do this for us. Bowley maybe.
So the funny thing is that's a great point because I think you used to be like. Back in the day in the NBA, it used to be like you used to like try to find the worst GM and make a trade with them.
You used to just call up James Dolan in New York and be like, "Hey,
your words, not mine," right? So, but now in the Prem, I don't think that exists anymore. I don't think there's any dumb money out there. I think there's some poorly run teams and some well-run teams, but no one's making like crazy level mistakes anymore with like big money. And
Except Liverpool now all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, that is the reporting around that is interesting and funny, and I think I think that institution is figuring out the roller coaster of like starting from the bottom, getting on top, and then staying on top is different to getting on top, right? Like that's a completely different ball game. Barca and Madrid fans can attest to that a lot more.
Yeah. Milan derby started 5 minutes ago. I really want to go and watch that. We didn't get to any of these graphs. Ali, do you want to? Is there anything in there that we didn't talk about that we need to unearth?
No, I think we touched on everything. I think the one thing I didn't touch on is like shout out Toni Kroos. What a season, man!
Yeah,
like
unbelievable.
Like unbelievable season. I also want to just like I'm so angry at it, but like the young French kids like Tchouameni, Camavinga, wow. I'm 100% on team. Why the hell isn't Camavinga playing more? That guy's just special, man. I know he makes mistakes that probably drive coaches wild, but like just game breaking ability, and you just got to put that on the pitch more often, I think. So I just think that there are some players having some, like Toni Kroos is just destroying our like metrics for like passing this year. He's just like on another plane, and you can see that. I've seen you guys talk about like the season he's having, and man, international retirement. People underestimate like what that means. I think a lot of my my arguments with my Real Madrid fans over the last few years have been the reason Benzema got so good is he stopped playing for France, man. Like that's part of it. That's part of the reason he, this is not normal for a 35-year-old to kind of like level up. Obviously, science is advancing, and he's taking care of himself a little bit more or whatever. But like, because we were having a Suarez versus Benzema debate, and I'm like, bro, Suarez just killed himself on the pitch every 90 minutes, every week, to Uruguay and back, and
the South America trips,
in the first phase of Benzema's career, he was like a 25 90s player, like he played 20-25 times. He was chilling for those first 5-6 years, you know what I mean? And then the France thing came, and so Tony, don't retire. What a fucking legend. And I know this is hearsay or whatever, but like Modric has slowed down. I mean, the gap between them is 4 years or whatever. Modric has slowed down a lot more than Toni Kroos has. At least this year, he can still put in that 8 year, and he puts in shifts. But like, I think Toni Kroos is also having like one of his best defensive seasons, and he's all there. Like I'm really enjoying watching him, and I hope he keeps this level up.
Well, one of the things I hated most about the Clásico loss, you see a lot of reactionary takes. And look, I'm not immune to it. I'm reactionary too. I'm emotional. Yeah. But the discourse I hated the most, and I continue to hate, is Kroos's finish, after a game like that. And I'm like, you almost feel silly, but you have to remind people that the last Clásico at the Bernabeu, Kroos was unbelievable that game. Like defense, offense, just incredible shift in that Clásico. And like, look, we had the same dialogue after that Chelsea loss during the pandemic when Kante and Mount were dominating our midfield. Same thing, Kroos's finish. Like, just that one I hate the most.
But look, you said his two competitors there were Kante and like Pedri, Gavi, Busquets, Frankie. Like sometimes you have an off day against that caliber player. Like shocking, Pedri is ridiculous. You know what I mean? And so that's gonna happen. But he's having a season for the ages, and I'm enjoying like watching him play. I'm enjoying like some of the new metrics we have around like line breaking passes and stuff, really pointing out that he's the first phase king, honestly. Like he gets the ball up the pitch in ways no one else could.
Well, this was fun. Excellent debut, Ali. Great job coming on here as a Barca fan, jinxing everything this season for Real Madrid,
hey,
saying
man,
we're so good.
Usually,
hey, guys, don't worry, you'll be fine. You're going to win the Champions League. I know what you're doing here. I do the same thing on a Barcelona podcast. I tell them how good it is. I tell them how they're going to win everything. Great jinxing stuff here. Well done. Thank you, man.
I appreciate you having me. And yeah, no, I think I hope it comes down to like, I miss one of those old-fashioned title races, right? So I do think that could happen this year. And I think, I don't remember when the last time we had that was. We were chasing, there was a year we were chasing Atleti and it wasn't that far, but like, we haven't had one of those in 5-6 years. And I think La Liga needs the energy boosts.
La Liga needs it for sure. Yeah, it's good to have every Spanish team back on top, as many Spanish teams as we can. Obviously, the rest of the league still has a lot to do, but yeah, Barca. This is a much better version of Barca than we've seen in the last couple of years since Messi left. Sid, always a pleasure. Thank you for throwing a shirt on this time and sitting up straight, somewhat, relatively speaking. Appreciate that. Ali, it was fun. Thanks. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Cheers, man. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening. And before we wrap it up here, we wanted to give a quick shout out to our patrons over on patreon.com/Managing Madrid, and specifically to our $10 plus patrons, because if you pledge $10 or more per month, you not only get access to everything and not only get guaranteed responses to your questions, you also get a specific shout out at the podcast. So shout out to our $10 plus patrons as follows: Brandon Alvarez, Willie Reed, Will Sousa, Wade Herring, Tobias Arroyo Botcher, Talab Salhab, Tahmid Kalam, Sushank Damala, Sujai Wani, Sumanchu Singh, Sheikh Hatiri, Shamil, Sergio Arispe, Santos Solrosano, Samuel Justin, Samar Z, Said Mahad, Sai Mohan, Sasi Kumar, Rodrigo Balmaceda, Rishi D, Phoenix, Peter Powell, Paulo Fierro, Patrick Odayafati, Oscar Barrera, Nico Laxo, Nicholas Moeller, Nick Ribeiro, Mowgli, MJ Diego, Michael Zinberg, Marin Myrtle, Matthew Atkins, Martin Ridman, Magnus Lext, Logan Stahl, Leon Stavronakis, Kunal Tilakar, Crystal Glass, Kevin Rivera, Jose Cruz, John Fernandez, Jason Fitz, Ian Marley, Graham Gerard, Gary Kohut, Frederick Rantakiro, Frederick Sundros, Faisal Hamdan, S.A. Davisito, Eloy Enriquez, Edward Sossman, Daniel Williams, Con P, Christian Toth, Christian Acosta, Charles Williams, Brendan Powers, Brandon Stevens, Ashik Bashar, Arnab Mukherjee, Arman Gashi, Armando L, Anirudh Singh, Ananya Kumar, Azaz Hussein, Adrian Rios, Adar Zalukovic, Adam Dorsey, Varun, Fabian Moreno, and Daniel Smith. We love you guys so much. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for being a part of this family. And Hala Madrid.